Lizzie Borden, page 75. It was hard to be watched so closely. Tuesday, August 9th, 1892. By now it was not unusual for Bridget Sullivan to find a policeman at the boarder's door. She was not, however, accustomed to them asking for her. She must come down to the police station, Inspector Daughtry informed her, either by foot or by carriage. Bridget began to cry. Just the day before, she had tried to pack up her things and get out for good, but the police would not let her go. Her tearful pleading, her begging that she couldn't sleep nights, that she was afraid to remain in the house any longer, made no difference. She had broken down so utterly that Marshal Hilliard himself had come to reason with her. What was a poor Irish girl of 25 to do but obey the marshal's orders and pass another night in that house? And now Inspector Daughtry had come to arrest her. But Bridget was wrong. It was only an inquest, Inspector Daughtry explained. The police wanted nothing more than to ask her questions. In that case, Bridget told Daughtry, she was willing to have the police or anyone else examine her every action since she arose Thursday morning. Bridget had no way of knowing it, but convening an inquest was an odd choice on the part of the authorities. Inquests are most commonly held in the event of a suspicious death to determine whether there is evidence of foul play. In the Borden case, that was the single fact that had been completely clear from the instant the bodies were discovered. What, then, were the police hoping to uncover? By law, the police were permitted, even encouraged, to conduct inquest proceedings in absolute secrecy to prevent pre-trial publicity from tainting potential jurors' opinions. But Fall River, as the New Bedford Evening Standard remarked, was a leaky place, and it could be no secret that something important was going on within the closely guarded doors of the central station. The papers had already noted the arrival of the district attorney, Mr. Hosea M. Knowlton. A few lucky reporters had also spotted medical examiner Dolan pulling up to the back door of the police station to unload a box from his carriage. When the lap robe covering the box slipped, the newspaper man was treated to a glimpse of a dress and a hatchet, and something else that could not quite make out. It did not take much sleuthing to deduce what the authorities might be discussing, and once again an eager crowd gathered in 2nd Street Tuesday afternoon in anticipation of a spectacle. They were not disappointed. Following Bridget's examination, Marshal Hilliard and Inspector Daughtry arrived at the Borden house at 1:40 with a subpoena, a summons for Lizzie to appear as a witness at the inquest upon the deaths of Andrew and Abby Borden. Immediately, instead of Lizzie, Mariella Brigham, Lizzie's childhood friend, emerged from number 92 and crossed the street to Dr. Bowen's house. The crowd rippled with excitement, but one of the Bordens fainted from the shock of the summons. But Miss Bryan returned without the doctor, and within a few minutes the marshal and Inspector Daughtry escorted Miss Bingham and Miss Lizzie into the waiting carriage. Since the funeral, the strain on Lizzie had begun to crack through her famously rigid exterior. In the past few days, Lizzie has terribly aged, the Fall River Herald reported. The full, round cheeks that friends of her former days remember have entirely disappeared, although the bright eyes and the haughty expression are still retained. There was not a falter in the steps as she came down the stairs. Again, the public noted that although she dressed in black, she still was not wearing deep mourning. As the carriage set off north up 2nd Street, the news that Miss Lizzie Borden was headed towards the police station outran the horses. Hundreds of spectators swarmed the entrance, grinding business in the center of town to a near standstill. Pale-faced and biting her lower lip, Lizzie made her way through the crowd and into the station, the doors locked behind her. I don't know how to answer it. Lizzie Borden stepped up to the witness stand. The second-floor courtroom was all but empty. The doors had been shut, an officer stationed on the landing to keep onlookers out of earshot. Beside her, Judge Josiah Blaisdell sat presiding. District Attorney Knowlton stood before her, a bearded man with a disinterested expression and a colossal build. His credentials were as formidable as his stature. A former Massachusetts state congressman and senator, Knowlton would one day become the state attorney general. The table alongside his, customarily occupied by the defense, was empty. Lawyer Jennings' petition to be present during Lizzie's questioning had been refused. No one but Marshal Hilliard, medical examiner Dolan, the state detective receiver, and the district attorney's stenographer, Miss Annie White, had been permitted to enter the courtroom. None of them advised Lizzie that she was not obligated to testify regarding anything that might incriminate herself. Presumably, Lawyer Jennings had already gone over the particulars of the procedure during the brief private conference the authorities granted them before Lizzie took the stand. No one mentioned the warrant for her arrest held by Marshal Hilliard, which allowed him to take her into custody at any moment. Even Lawyer Jennings did not know about that. Bridget Sullivan had already testified for 2.5 hours, and despite her repeated request to go home, was now sequestered in the matron's room. What Bridget said, what she might have divulged, Lizzie had no way of knowing. Whatever it was had been interesting enough to delay Judge Bledsow's habitually prompted noon dinner time by a full 30 minutes. "Give me your full name," Knowlton began. One startling fact must be acknowledged. The first volume of the original inquest transcript has been lost. The official record of the one and only time Lizzie Andrew Borden was ever directly questioned in court, gone. What remains is a copy printed in the New Bedford Evening Standard on June 12, 1893. District Attorney Knowlton himself provided the transcript, which is believed to have been reprinted verbatim. It is impossible to know if the Evening Standard made any significant changes to Lizzie's words. Other newspapers certainly did. At any rate, it is the most complete and accurate version known to exist. The Evening Standard versus the Daily Journal. Another frequently quoted source for Lizzie Borden's inquest testimony is the Providence Daily Journal. Since the 1920s, prominent Borden scholars have asserted that the Daily Journal's version does not differ widely from the New Bedford Evening Standards, claiming that the two vary only in slight detail. In reality, anyone can see at a glance just how different they are. The Daily Journal printed less than 5% of Lizzie's testimony, reducing the number of words from 15,535 to 651. Nearly 100 of District Attorney Knowlton's questions are missing, and Lizzie's answers have been condensed into long paragraphs full of disjointed sentences that ricochet from one subject to another. As a result, Knowlton's wording is often attributed to Lizzie, such as when she states seemingly out of the blue, "I made no effort to find my mother at all." The Evening Standard's version reveals that it was actually Knowlton who asked, at the end of a series of questions regarding Miss Borden's whereabouts, "You made no effort to find your mother at all?" Lizzie simply answered, "No, sir." Despite its alterations to the inquest text, the Daily Journal made only a handful of factual errors. Nevertheless, the Daily Journal's version of Lizzie's testimony created a distorted view of Lizzie Borden's voice and state of mind that had spanned 3 centuries. Whether she was guilty or innocent, Lizzie Borden's inquest testimony was nothing short of catastrophic. Her answers appear so evasive, contradictory, and obstinate, it's hard to imagine anyone attempting to prove his or her innocence more ineffectively. And yet Knowlton had his work cut out for him. Lizzie was astonishingly ignorant of her own family's affairs. She was not certain of her stepmother's age or how much real estate her father owned. She could give no useful information about Andrew Borden's financial worth or say whether he had a will. "Not that I know of," she said more than once, "and I cannot locate the time exactly. I'm not sure, but I think it was chore enough to extract plain facts from her. Trying to get an idea of more abstract notions, such as the feelings between her and her stepmother, proved a daunting task. Lizzie testified that she had never had trouble with her stepmother in her life. "There's simply a difference of opinion," she said, regarding Andrew Borden's purchase of Bertie Whitehead's house. "You have been on pleasant terms with your stepmother since then?" Knowlton asked. "Yes, sir," Lizzie said. "Cordial?" Knowlton pressed. "It depends upon one's idea of cordiality, perhaps." "According to your idea of cordiality." "We were friendly, very friendly." "Cordial according to your idea of cordiality." "Quite so." "What do you mean by quite so?" "Quite cordial." "I do not mean the dearest of my friends is in the world, but very kindly feeling and pleasant. I do not know how to answer you any better than that." Knowlton was not satisfied. Round and round they went, Lizzie conceding a bare minimum of information to each question, forcing Knowlton to prompt and pry for more. "You did not regard her as your mother?" "Not exactly, no, although she came there when I was very young." "Were your relations towards her that of a daughter and mother?" "In some ways it was, and in some ways it was not." "In what way was it?" I declined to answer. "Why?" "Because I don't know how to answer it." "In what ways was it not?" "I did not call her mother." "What name did she go by?" "Miss Borden." "When did you begin to call her Miss Borden?" "I should think 5 or 6 years ago." "Before that time you had called her mother?" "Yes, sir." "What led to the change?" "The affair with her stepsister." Miss Borden had no stepsister. Lizzie, of course, met Bertie Whitehead, Abby Borden's half-sister. So that the affair was serious enough to have you change from calling her mother, do you mean? I did not choose to call her mother. Have you ever called her mother since? Yes, occasionally. To her face, I mean. Yes. Often? No, sir. Seldom? Seldom. Knowlton prodded a while longer, then abruptly changed his line of questioning to Lizzie's whereabouts the morning of the murders. Just as suddenly Lizzie began answering more freely, even volunteering information. Lizzie had been the last to rise that Thursday morning. Everyone had eaten, and Uncle Morse had gone to call on another relative in Fall River. Mr. Borden sat in his large chair reading the Providence Daily Journal, while Miss Borden dusted in the dining room. Bridget was just bringing in the brush and bucket to wash windows. Lizzie had been ill most of the day before and did not care much about breakfast. She might have eaten half a banana, perhaps, and a molasses cookie. She did not remember. Her father went into town while the women continued their various chores. Lizzie set up a little ironing board on the dining room table, laid out 8 or 10 of her best handkerchiefs, and put the flat irons on the stove to heat. Knowlton worded his next question very carefully, for he knew that medical examiner Dolan believed that Miss Borden had been dead for an hour to an hour and a half when he first saw her body at 11:45. That meant whoever murdered Abby Borden had done so while her husband was out on his morning errands, exactly the time Lizzie was about to describe. How long had she spent ironing her handkerchiefs? Knowlton wanted to know. I did not finish them, Lizzie said. My flats were not hot enough. How long a job would it have been if the flats had been right? 20 minutes, Lizzie guessed. How long did you work on the job? Knowlton asked again. I don't know, sir. What Knowlton had really asked was, where were you when your stepmother was killed? Lizzie Borden had given no alibi. I am so confused, I don't know one thing from another. Where were you when your father returned? Knowlton continued. With that one question, Lizzie Borden's testimony fell apart. I was down in the kitchen, she said, reading an old magazine that had been left in the cupboard, an old Harper's Magazine. Even if the original inquest transcript were available, it would not convey the atmosphere in the room at that moment. Every one but Lizzie must have understood the significance of what she had just said. Whether the authorities reacted, whether Lizzie sensed any astonishment or suspicion, it is impossible to know. Her answer flatly contradicted the version of Mr. Borden's arrival Bridget Sullivan had given only a few hours before. What exactly had Bridget said, no one knows for sure. Once again, the answer is in that missing volume of inquest testimony and in Bridget's case. There are no newspapers to resurrect it from. The nearest approximation is her preliminary hearing testimony given 2 weeks later. District Attorney Knowlton himself considered it almost identical to what she said at the inquest. So what is known of Andrew Borden's return home is taken from Bridget's earliest surviving testimony given August 26th and 27th. According to that testimony, when Mr. Borden turned his key in the front door's spring lock, it did not open. Bridget, washing windows in the sitting room, heard him trying to unlock the door and went to open it for him. The interior key and bolt, which normally were unlocked each morning, were still fastened. Puzzled and fumbling, Bridget cursed the door. From upstairs came the familiar sound of a laugh, Lizzie's. That information alone had been remarkable. If Dr. Dolan was right about the time of Miss Borden's death, then Bridget Sullivan's testimony that Lizzie Borden was not the only one on the second floor at the moment Abby Borden was up there too, probably still bleeding onto the Brussels carpet. If Lizzie had not done the killing, then the murder might have been lurking upstairs as well. And now Lizzie Borden stood at the witness stand, swearing under oath that she had been in the opposite end of the house entirely. One of the women must be wrong or lying. District Attorney Knowlton had to find out which. Are you sure you were in the kitchen when your father returned? He asked, leaving her an opening to change his mind. I'm not sure whether I was there in the dining room, Lizzie said. Knowlton began to nudge his question toward Bridget's testimony. Did you go back to your room before your father returned? Yes, Lizzie remembered hanging up some clean clothes, staying only long enough to make a quick repair to one of their garments. Was that the time when your father came home? He came home after I came downstairs. You were not upstairs when he came home? Knowlton asked outright. I was not upstairs when he came home, no, sir. Bridget Sullivan had not given Knowlton one reason to doubt her. Bridget's responses had been so clear and consistent, so forthright, that she had been dismissed as a suspect almost immediately. Lizzie, with her terse, vague answers, had not inspired the same confidence. Anyone standing in Knowlton's shoes would have been skeptical of Lizzie's claim. He diverted her with a few questions about the locks, then returned to the upstairs-downstairs issue from a different angle. Where were you when the bell rang? I think in my room upstairs, Lizzie said, contradicting herself as plainly as she contradicted Bridget's testimony only moments ago. Then you were upstairs when your father came home, Knowlton asked. I don't know, sure, but I think I was. What were you doing? As I say, I took up the clean clothes and stopped and basted a little piece of tape on a garment. Did you come down before your father was let in? I was on the stairs coming down when she let him in. Then you were upstairs when your father came to the house on his return. I think I was. Lizzie Borden's credibility evaporated. First one story, then another, as though Knowlton's questions were not connected to each other. She did not seem to be thinking at all. Since Friday night, Lizzie had been taking morphine, a highly addictive sedative and painkiller made from opium, capable of causing troublesome side effects such as confusion and hallucinations, for mental distress and nervous excitement. Saturday, the day of the funeral and the search, the day Lizzie learned she was a suspect, Dr. Bowen had doubled the dose. By today's standards, the prescription was unremarkable. Lizzie had been taking approximately 16 milligrams of morphine a day since Saturday, August 6th. Of course, there is no way to prove whether the inconsistencies in Lizzie Borden's inquest testimony were caused by morphine. It is a fact, however, that today testimony given by a witness under the influence of any narcotic would be questionable, if not indismissible. Knowlton, in all probability, knew nothing of this, so it is hard to tell whether his tone was sarcastic or patient when he asked, You remember, Miss Borden, I will call your attention to it so as to see if you have any misunderstandings, not for the purpose of confusing you. You remember that you told me several times that you were downstairs and not upstairs when your father came home. You have forgotten, perhaps? Lizzie finally seemed to realize the bind she was in. I don't know what I have said, she admitted. I have answered so many questions. I am so confused. I don't know one thing from another. Knowlton reminded her that she had said, then asked again, Downstairs? I think I was downstairs in the kitchen. And then you were not upstairs. I think I was not, Lizzie decided. She had carried the clothes up right after using the water closet, then had come down and stayed down. It must have been a different day that she'd been on the steps when the doorbell rang. I now call your attention to the fact that you have specifically told me you had gone down upstairs, Knowlton said, and had been there about 5 minutes when the bell rang, and were on your way down, and were on the stairs, and Maggie let your father in that day. Yes, I said that, and then I said I did not know whether I was on the stairs or in the kitchen. Now, how will you have it? I think, as nearly as I know, I think I was in the kitchen. Knowlton had given Lizzie one more chance, and she had failed. That was the worst of it, but it was not the end. Lizzie could also not account for how she and Miss Borden could have spent the 2 hours from 9 to 11 in the house together without crossing each other's paths, or for why she had not noticed that Miss Borden never came downstairs after going up to put fresh pillow slips on the guest bed, an errand that should have occupied no more than 2 minutes. Aside from Lizzie's brief trip to the water closet and then upstairs to put her clean clothes away, it was almost impossible for Abby Borden to have left the spare room or the house itself without Lizzie seeing or hearing her. Yet Lizzie supposed Miss Borden had gone up the back stairs to make up her own bed, or out marketing as she usually did, perhaps visiting her sick friend along the way, even though she would have walked right past Lizzie to do so. Nothing added up.